Hi, and welcome to this presentation on English prosody. So, today we'll be going through two main things, intonation and emphasis. Prosody in English is essentially the combination of a few different things. First of all, we have pitch, so high pitch versus low pitch, and how we use that pitch. In English, we describe it as rising versus falling. So, rising would be uh, and falling would be uh, okay? And when we talk about pitch within the context of speech and within the context of whether it's rising or falling at a particular point in the sentence or on a particular word, that's what we know as intonation, right? Pitch exists in the universe without humans, but intonation is about speech. In addition to pitch, we have emphasis, and emphasis is all about using extra volume, so loud versus quiet, duration, so time, whether something is short or long, extra duration, whether something is longer, and pitch of the stressed syllable of an important word. For example, in that sentence, I put emphasis on the word word. We also have pauses, right? Silence, because silence is a part of speech. And I'm not going to talk about pauses today, but you will have noticed that before I emphasized the word, I did put a small pause there in front of it. And in general, for performance, pauses are very important. But we'll talk about that more in class rather than during this video. Okay, so intonation. Intonation is variation in pitch on a sentence level with peaks on stressed syllables. Now, this is very, very important. Something that I see students doing with regards to intonation is that they'll think, oh, okay, I need falling or rising intonation, so I'm just going to do that on whatever syllable I want to do in this particular sentence, or even worse, in the last word of this sentence. But you can't do that because English is a stress-timed language. So whatever change in intonation is happening, that happens on the stressed syllable. Okay? It's never going to happen on an unstressed syllable. So the peaks, the very high points are either, at the end of a stressed syllable or at the beginning of a stressed syllable. So at the end when it's rising and at the beginning of the stressed syllable when it's falling. You'll see what I mean. I'll show you a visual example of this. Now, intonation is often used to convey emotion, all right? Actually, what I'm going to do uh, is play you some of these hers, right? When you're reading them on the screen, you can sort of pause the video and try this out yourself. How would you say the same word but with confusion, extreme confusion, surprise, delight, acceptance, suspicion, and of course there can be so many more emotions. But I'm going to play these for you, and what you should be able to see on screen is a bunch of different, there we go, that's what we want, is a bunch of different hus. And these blue lines here, these are our pitch contours. So they're showing us what kind of pitch we have, um, and where it starts, where it ends. So here we have 0 hertz, 5,000 hertz, and if we just look here, we can see that with confusion we have a rising pitch. It's not just a rise. There's a little bit of a fall before, but then there's a big rise. With extreme confusion, it's the same shape, but we're starting a little bit higher and we're ending much higher. With surprise, we start much higher, it's a clear rise and then a clear fall. Um, with delight, we have a very big fall, so a very wide pitch range. With acceptance, it's that rise and fall, a little bit like surprise, but it's so much lower and it's so much shorter. And with suspicion, we begin quite high, much like with delight, but we immediately fall and it's sort of a little bit longer. So now that I've sort of gone through these with the description, you can listen to them.
Huh? 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 Hmm.
Okay, so those aren't the most amazing performances there. And something that I heard, that I thought to myself, oh, you might interpret that differently, is this delight one. And when I heard it just by itself, I thought, actually, that doesn't sound like delight. That sounds like the opposite of delight. That sounds like disappointment, which is why intonation cannot do everything, right? You need to see the person's face. So, for example, if I say, ah, all right, that's clearly delight. But if I say, ah, that's disappointment, even though I'm doing a very similar pitch contour. And of course, in performance, at least the way we're doing it with, the stage and being in front of an audience, your face is going to be quite important for emotion as well. But uh, emotion is not everything in intonation. Intonation also does grammar, and this is super important. When you think of grammar, you usually think of word order or conjugation, or maybe you think a little bit of prefixes and suffixes, although that's very often to do with vocabulary. But people don't think a lot about intonation. And what I like to say is that um, the way that we represent intonation in writing is through punctuation. But the problem, of course, is that punctuation is very, very limited. If we look at um, the previous slide, we're trying to show that intonation through those question marks and those exclamation marks and the full stop and the smiley face, but that can't tell you everything. Um, and yeah, intonation is much more complex, nuanced, varied than punctuation will ever be, right? But writing is a bad translation of speech, and it's what we've got. Maybe one day somebody will come up with a writing system where you draw your pitch contours over your sentences, but in general, people don't seem to think that that's very necessary. Although, sorry, I digress. But when you think about the communication issues that people have online, where they don't understand whether something is a joke or not, or whether it's sarcastic or not, or even whether somebody truly means what they say, or what basic emotion is going with that, we can see that maybe a better punctuation system where we can really see the rises and falls in pitch contours in our intonation would be useful, right? Now, people get across, people have tried to solve this problem using emojis, although emojis can lead to misinterpretation. People also use /S for sarcasm or /J for joking, but those aren't very popular, really. So it's something to think about. Okay, now, why are we going to talk about grammar and intonation? Because one of the major mistakes that I see students making, my French speaking students who are learning English, is that they will apply rising statement intonation to every single sentence in English. Now, rising statement intonation is French. Okay, let me try and give you an example. Par exemple, si je parle en français, je peux finir ma phrase en montant à la fin de la phrase. Nanana, nanana. Mais ça, c'est la fin de la phrase. Euh, Il n'y a pas de problème avec ça. On sait très bien que je ne suis pas en train de poser une question. Ta, 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 ta. Alors, j'ai pas besoin de faire ça. Je peux aussi descendre à la fin de ma phrase. Et c'est tout à fait normal aussi, comme je suis en train de le faire maintenant. Mais il y a des personnes qui, par habitude, je pense, montent toujours en fin de phrase quand elles parlent français. Et si on traduit ça en anglais, eh ben, ça foire la grammaire, en fait, as you will see right now. So, when we give a statement in English, a statement is une proposition in French. So it's a sentence that is just here's what I think. Okay, there's no question about it. It's just a statement. We use falling intonation for that. Now, the caveat: there are many accents, there are many varieties of English where a statement can use a rising intonation. For example, in my variety of English, the variety that I'm using to speak to you right now is what you could probably describe as a sort of uh, more middle class, standard Midlands English. But if I go back to the working class accents that I would hear, at school among my classmates rather than among my teachers, then I might start speaking like this. And going up at the end of the sentences is very normal in that kind of Brummie accent. And it's actually quite normal in a lot of Northern accents, like in a Scouse accent, also in Northern Irish accents. That's very normal as well. So when when I say that falling intonation, a falling pitch contour is what we need for statements, I'm saying that about this kind of standardized English that I'm trying to teach you. And you might say, oh, well, I want to learn a variety of English that has rising statement intonation so that it doesn't matter whether I use my French rising statement intonation or not. And to that I will say, no, because the way that you rise is also important. You can't just apply French rising intonation. You have to have that specific variety's rising intonation. And in fact, the rising intonation, the rising statement intonation that I just used is not the same in the other varieties that I listed. It's not the same in Scouse. It's not the same in Northern Irish. To use an American accent, the Valley Girl accent sort of has a bit of a rise at the end for certain statements, and it's not the same. It's not exactly the same pitch contour. So you can't just copy and paste your French intonation onto English. The second reason why I'd say it's not a good idea to just go, oh, I can use this, whatever, people will just think I'm using a strange, or people will just think I'm using a Northern English variety of English. No, they're going to think you're using a strange thing. Why? Because a lot of my intermediate level students also have a problem with word order in questions, in that they don't use question word order. So if they don't use question word order and they're constantly using rising intonation, then nobody can tell what the difference is between their statements and their questions. And that does cause confusion in communication. Now, my approach to teaching pronunciation is not that you need to master a specific variety or a specific accent, or even that you need to try for perfection in any way, or that you need to erase your French accent. That's not what I'm about. I'm about getting you to pronounce things in a way that 99% of people who are listening to you will understand. And that comes with, if that comes with a little bit of a French accent, fine, I don't care. But this issue with intonation, with questions versus statements, does cause a lot of confusion. So that's why I want to teach you about it. That's why I want to work on it. So that's our statement. Now, with an open question, so this is a question that requires an answer that is not just yes or no, okay? Or that is not just A or B, okay? Here we have what job did she get? That's falling, okay? What job did she get? And we're going to see this with the spectrogram and the pitch contour analysis later. Or it's non-neutral rising. And non-neutral means that there is some kind of emotion in there. For example, if you tell me, oh, she got hired as a CEO, and I don't believe this, or I'm surprised, or I'm shocked, I might say, sorry, what job did she get? Da 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 da. That's rising intonation, yeah? But it's only rising because I have a non-neutral way of asking that question. If I'm just asking, like, oh, what job did she get? That's going to be falling, okay? So this is why it's important to take emotion into account here. With a closed question, one where the answer is yes or no, or A or B, where you're giving two options, you want rising intonation, okay? Did she get the job? We're rising. And if you want to add extra emotion, you just increase the amplitude, right? You go further. Did she get the job? You know, maybe you're going to do something like that, but it's still the same shape. It's just an increase in amplitude. Then we have the infamous question with statement word order. Now, I know I just said, like, oh, you know, a problem that my students have is that they don't use question word order, and the implication behind that is you should learn question word order. But sometimes you do want to express a an emotion, and you're going to use statement word order, but you're going to use question rising intonation, closed question rising intonation. So she got the job, da 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 da, you know, and you can see that there's shock, or there's surprise, or there's disgust, or there's something else going on there. Um, and Yeah, that needs to be so it needs to be very distinguishable. Like, she got the job versus she got the job. Those two need to be very, very different. And then finally, we have rising, falling. Now, this is quite important as well. When you have a list in English, you'll notice that after the first two items in this list, you have a comma. You don't necessarily need this second comma, but I prefer to use it, again, for clarity, for ease of communication. But what you get there is a rise. And we rise at the end of these two list items to let the speaker know that it is not final. And we also do this at the ends of clauses. For example, what I just did then at the ends of clauses, for example, lets you know that I'm continuing my sentence. Whereas what I just did there, continuing my sentence, falling, that lets you know that I finished my sentence. The statement is over, okay? It's final. So if I say this, I've got, she got the job, a new flat, and a new car. So we're rising, and then we're falling, okay? So let's have a little look at these. So here we have our falling statement. So you can see we've got a little bit of a rise on this syllable here. That's the syllable got, because it's a stressed syllable, and we need somewhere to fall from, right? So this is not really a rise, but you can see it's higher than the first syllable. And then we've got our fall going down to the end here. So let's listen to this.
She got the job. She got the job. She got the job.
So you'll notice that this whole thing is job, job, job. There's that fall in intonation. So it's not, she got the job. It's not like that. You're really falling on the stressed syllable. And if the word was let's say, a two-syllable word like contract, right? It would be, she got the contract. Yeah, she got the contract. Because then we have that second syllable, which we can go down on. And in fact, I think, you know, I can just show you this right now. If we do a new recording, she got the contract. All right, so let's do that. Save to list, and then we're going to view it. All right, let's cut this off here so we can get better repetition. All right. She got the contract. Okay, so actually, I think what we have here is we don't even see the pitch contour because it's so low, right? So she got the contract. Okay, she got the contract. She got the contract. All right, and I think if we compare that to this one, you can see that it's very similar. Little rise and then ba-bam fall at the end. Okay. Number two, here we have what job did she get? We can see again falling intonation.
What job did she get? What job did she get? What job did she get?
Okay, then moving on to rising. So this is our open question.
Did she get the job? Did she get the job? Did she get the job?
So we can see here, we start sort of in the middle for a little bit, job, job, okay? We move up like that within the same syllable. Also notice that we begin our question quite high. So we call this rising intonation, but maybe we should call it falling rising intonation, okay? Then our next one is so this is our question with statement word order, and of course it's non-neutral. So we can see that we start off kind of in the same place for a normal statement. We go up, which is normal, and then we finish very, very high up here.
She got the job. She got the job. She got the job.
Yeah, she got the job, and there's that kind of break there. All right, and finally, uh, here we have our non-final rising and then falling intonation.
She got the job.
Where is the rest of it? Oh, I know what's happening here. The analysis. Let me put 30 seconds on that. Why isn't that? So this is the whole recording? All right, we got to do it again. Okay. Sorry about this. I did not think that this would have happened. All right. She got the job, a new flat, and a new car. Okay. Non-final. View and edit. All right. This is what we want. So let's cut that off. Get some good repetitions. Okay. She got the job, a new flat, and a new car. She got the job, a new flat, and a new car. She got the job, a new flat, and a new car. So notice here that these are the rising intonations, okay? New job, new flat, and new flat. Flat is a little bit lower here. Uh, and a new car. And then, and a new is sort of all on one level, and then car is very distinctly falling down here. And I think what would happen is if we got an even longer list, you would see that we would begin our first rise even higher, and then our second rise is slightly lower, and then a third rise slightly lower, all the way until we get to the final four. So it's rise, 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 fall, but each rise is lower each time. So that is question intonation. Finally, emphasis. So, emphasis is when a word in a sentence gets extra volume, time, and a higher pitch on its stressed syllable, again, very important, on its stressed syllable, in order to highlight its importance or to correct or prevent a misunderstanding. So I think it's just easiest if I show you this with examples. So a normal sentence, bog standard sentence is, I didn't tell her about the treasure. Simple. I didn't tell her about the treasure, someone else did. So notice what I've done here is I've used italics because that's how we represent emphasis in writing, but I've also bolded the syllable that actually gets this emphasis. This isn't very important for a word like I, where there's only one syllable, but for the words where there are two syllables, you'll be able to see and hear the fact that the emphasis goes on the stressed syllable and nowhere else. Okay? I didn't tell her about the treasure. I did something else, or I told her something else. Okay? So notice here, the whole of the word didn't is in italics, but it is the stressed syllable that gets the emphasis. I didn't tell her about the treasure. I did something else, or I told her something else. I didn't tell her about the treasure. I wrote to her about it, or I hinted at it. Yeah? And remember what I was saying about pauses earlier? Here, I think you can really hear the pause. I didn't tell her about the treasure. And I could maybe do it without the pause. I didn't tell her about the treasure. So that pause is optional. Yeah. I didn't tell her about the treasure. I told someone else. I didn't tell her about the treasure. I just mentioned it existed. I didn't tell her about the treasure. I told her about some other treasure. I didn't tell her about the treasure. I told her about something else. So, emphasis, we also do that in French, but the important thing to note in English is that the emphasis must be on the stressed syllable of the word, or if the word has only one syllable, well, it's just going to be on that syllable, whether that word is originally stressed or not. Notice also that when I stressed the word the, I changed the vowel to the. Now, normally we would only use the as a pronunciation of the in front of a vowel. For example, the apple instead of the apple, right? It's a little bit harder to say, so we say the apple. But when we emphasize the word the, no matter what the next word starts with, whether it's a consonant or a vowel, we pronounce it the. A similar thing happens for the article a, right? If I say a table, but then I want to emphasize it, I'll say a table, right? But it's not as confusing as with the, because of course with when we have a vowel after it, we just say an, yeah? For example, an apple. And if I want to emphasize that, I'll say an apple. Okay, so that's all for prosody, and I hope you enjoy imitating all of these different pitch contours, these different intonations, and all of this different emphasis throughout the week.